So, good morning or good afternoon, whichever you are, or wherever you are from the world. And welcome to this free expert session entitled Unlock the PM Mindset, the Hidden Key to Passing the 2025 PMP and CAPM exams. By the way, Jerome Glenn Lumpon, and I am introducing our coach, leader, trainer for today's live expert session. It is my absolute honor to introduce to you Dr. Michael Schick. He is an accomplished Army combat veteran and a PMP, as well as the founder of RoseMed, a leading organization in project management education. He has a master's in project management and international relations and holder of a doctorate degree in business administration. But beyond the titles and credentials, Dr. Sheikh is a devoted husband of over 20 years and a proud father of eight. And when he's not equipping future project leaders, you'll find him cheering on the sidelines of taekwondo matches or soccer games and chasing the joyful chaos of a very full and a very active family life. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Dr. Michael Schick.
Thanks, Jerome. I appreciate that. And thanks for everybody on the call. Just one point of clarification. I know for most folks, this is a bit of a nuance, but I'm an Air Force guy, not an Army vet. So,
Thank you for the correction.
though I've spent a lot of combat time with the Army, I'm an Air Force guy. So I appreciate that, Jerome. And like I said, welcome to everybody on the who's watching either live or the recording at a later time. So what we are talking about today is project management mindset, and this is a focus to help you pass, whether it be your PMP, your project management professional certification, or your certified associate project management exam. So this mindset is one of those things that it's not just focused on, talking about the tools and, how you're going to actually take the exam. It's the mindset that's associated with it, as well as being a project manager. So jumping into the topics, we'll look at the introduction. We'll discuss what the PMI actually tests, what it's looking at from a perspective, from the assessor perspective, as well as 4 pillars of project management mindset. We'll look at things such as human-centered leadership, strategic alignment, and things of that nature. So beginning in, I want to set the stage of why we're here. All right. And this session is about how to think, lead, and decide like PMI wants you to as a project member or a project manager. Okay. So this is doing the PMI assessment, whether it be the Certified Associate in Project Management or the PMP. It's all about they're looking at you as leading projects or being part of that project management team. So they're trying to assess your ability to be effective in delivering value for a customer or client through projects. Now, this isn't just about passing an exam. All right. Obviously, when we look at this, the aspect of taking the exam, it's easy for us who are getting ready for this exam to look at it from a transactional perspective. And that's understandable because you are studying for one of these certifications, and there's a lot of things that could be riding on this, such as, a higher salary, maybe a job promotion, the ability to apply for a position, things of that nature. And those are real and those are tangible. But when we take a step back and think more deeply about what it is we're doing, it's not a transactional action that we're doing to just simply study for a test to brain dump it later when we're actually leading or being part of a project team. All right. So we need to shift our mindset, and both from a test perspective, but also from, an individual perspective, understanding what it is you're doing. And now the examination or the assessment is actually looking at your judgment. It's trying to assess your judgment as well as Are your decision making decisions in alignment with the Project Management Institute's thoughts on how to lead a project? All right. Moreover, it's looking at it, are you thinking like a project manager? Are you leading like a project manager? And are you responding like a project manager? All right. It's not simply tools and techniques, or rather inputs, tools and techniques and outputs. It is more of, all right, do you embody what it is to be a project manager or a project team member through the PMI lens? And so taking a step back and thinking about this logically, you're the test taker. What does it take for you as a test taker? Put yourself in the position of PMI if you were delivering the test. What would you want to see? That's the mindset that we need to go into this prep phase, if you will. I'll tell you, just taking a step back before I got into project management, unbeknownst to me, I was really a project manager before I actually had the official title project manager. And the reason for that is I was doing project work. I was dealing with stakeholders. I was taking on unique, interconnected, and complex actions that required me to have a focus and actually deliver value for project sponsors and customer clients. I just wasn't a project manager, and the title came later, but as I accumulated experience and felt like I was oftentimes beating a square peg through a round hole, really probably should have some form of an additional, tools and techniques or a framework to put me in place so I can do this effectively rather than just through brute force. And so that's what I set out to do. And that's when I really started looking at the landscape, and I came across the Project Management Institute, which, oh, by the way, is in 200 plus countries across the globe. And so understanding that I needed to have a mindset, understand leadership, accountability, as well as, systems thinking was what I needed to be successful. And we'll get into each one of these in kind. But for today, we're going to talk about what it is that PMI really looks for, which is judgment, not necessarily rote memorization, coupled with the 4 pillars of a PM mindset and tools for your growth. So when we look at PMI, they're assessing your judgment and are you aligned with their approach and their methodology. And how they go about doing this is, one, creating questions that require critical thought and oftentimes are situational in nature. And so what do I mean by that? Rather than simply saying something to the effect of, what's one of the first actions in the initiating process group do you need to take? Well, could it be business case? Is that part of initiating? Or is it developing a stakeholder register? Or is it developing a project charter? Or, could it be risk management? All right. That's very much transactional. That's rote memorization rather than saying, okay, you have met with your project sponsor, and the project sponsor and you have also met with the client who is talking about these type of specifications that is needed. And we're trying to connect that with the value output. What are the items in initiating that you need to consider? Well, if it's a single question, that's certainly a single answer is acceptable. Then you would look for the best answer, the best single answer. But now, what if it is multiple answers? Now you need to say, all right, has the business case already been done? Initiating process group really has 2 items, and that's identifying stakeholders and developing a charter. Those are 2 specific tools that are needed for initiating. right? Rather the outputs. So these are the type of things that you need to consider as you are working on studying for your exam and understanding, is it situational based? Is it looking for rote memorization? There is certainly situational type questions on the CAPM, just like the PMP. And while there's going to be a little bit more rote memorization because this is for those getting started into project management, and the scope and the lens is a little bit different. But ultimately, we're looking at the situational type questions, and it needs to be aligned with PMI. And that is necessarily through PMI's lens. They see this as technically and tactically accurate. And so what you believe as a technically correct answer, if it doesn't align with PMI's approach, then go with the PMI approach. All right. The best answer, like I said, isn't necessarily the ideal outcome. And so what do we mean by that? Well, the questions are intentionally ambiguous, oftentimes have multiple plausible answers. And so we want to make sure that we are protecting our stakeholder relationships. We want to prevent escalation of work, creating more things to do that expands or adds creep to the overall perspective. We want to demonstrate professional conduct, and we want to make sure that we uphold the code of ethics. So if you are looking at ruining a relationship just simply so you can get an output on time, is that really the right approach? And we got to look at it through that lens that says, no, protecting the relationship that you've developed is, more transformational than a transactional item. Now, spot the scenario before you answer. All right. So look at the themes. Are you talking about stakeholder disengagement? Are you looking at, is the purpose of the question to look at scope creep, or is it risk realization? Are there communication gaps? All right. Recognize the scenarios for what it is, not simply the format. So identify the subject of the question and then any modifiers to that subject, and then build faster. You got to be able to move fast and confidently. You have a little over 70 seconds, depending on the test, or right around 70 to 80 seconds to answer each question. And you have to keep this marathon up. If you're talking about the PMP, for nearly 4 hours, for the CAPM, 3 hours. And these questions are long. So you need to get used to, and I highly recommend getting used to, going through the test, going through the examination, some sort of test simulator, and getting the cadence down and being able to answer the questions quickly, being able to identify the subject effectively, what type of scenario you're in, and looking for those key words that either amplify what you need to answer or modify what the answer should be. I'll tell you, for those who've been around me for some time, when I sat for the examination, the very first test question, so whether you're taking the CAPM or the PMP, PMI injects a few test questions that they are testing to see how people do on it. It's certainly on the certification exam, but these are not scored questions. These are they're questions that are being tested and evaluated for future assessment value. Well, I got what I believe to be one of those questions on my very first question as I sat in for the exam. And I read this, this question, and it didn't make sense. So I was looking for the subject. I was looking for any modifiers. I was looking at the answers, really looking at the keywords to try and dissect what was being said, as well as reading the question. And the first time I read it, I don't quite know what this is saying. I read it again. It didn't make sense. I read it a third time. It simply didn't make sense. And I came to the realization that I had likely one of those questions that were being evaluated for future use, because the sentence grammatically it was correct, but it made zero sense. And so you talk about a disheartening question right out of the gate on the first question on my PMP examination. Fortunately, it all went well, no issues as the final results, but there was a little bit of a concern right out of the gate, with that type of question. So make sure you're prepared for something, a curveball like that, if you will. I'm not saying that it's going to happen to you. All I'm saying is that how I was able to recover is I took a deep breath. I realized that I have a bunch of questions and that some of these questions are simply an evaluation from PMI. That was it. And then I moved on. And because I've took the test simulator over and over, I was able to complete the exam within the 4-hour time limit. I did several of them. I was getting in the 80s to 90s. These test simulations, I was confident that I was able to move forward. So that's the type of consideration and resilience that you need to have. And so test your ability. Make sure you have something that tests your ability to think like a project manager or a project team member. Work with folks on your team through your study, join a community, and get some test simulators that show and allow you to take these exam preps and make sure that you are ready to go and you are going to be effective when you sit for the actual exam. Don't be like so many people that I've heard who goes with a particular program that gives you the warm fuzzy and confidence, but actually doesn't test your ability to sit within a specific amount of time. The test simulators should be at or more difficult than PMI's tests. So that way, when you walk out of those exams, you can be that you passed. Also, like I said, make sure you're part of a community. Reach out to your peers or mentors in that discussion area so you can ask questions and get feedback. So you don't need to do this in a vacuum alone, but so keep that in mind. And the mindset isn't necessarily set on memory, and certainly, don't focus on the score, focus on understanding, thinking like a project manager with PMI's frameworks. And so evaluate the questions as a leader if you're a project sponsor through a PMI lens. So PMI is ultimately trying to get to the question of, can I trust you, project manager, project team member, to manage a project effectively, lead a project effectively without breaking anything, that you show consistency, you're calm under pressure, you have an ethical framework, so you do what's right, you have integrity, do what's right when nobody's looking, all under pressure. And that's what the exam ultimately tries to assess, not simply, your ability to mark the right answer. All right, moving in the 4 pillars of project management, we're going to start with systems thinking and structure. So this is through ways of working, and ways of working spans multiple different areas, whether being agile or adaptive, as well as predictive and hybrid. But system thinking is just not solely task oriented. You have to manage interdependencies. And so what does that mean? Managing interdependencies is, can you manage scope with your schedule and cost and quality? And sometimes you got to focus on cost rather than quality, but it needs to be communicated, and the stakeholders, particularly your customer, client, or project sponsor, need to know about it and need to weigh in on how you proceed. So you are going to have to continuously balance these interdependencies, all to achieve the ends and ultimately create value. So you focus on value delivery, all right? And you look at the trade-offs to meet the specifications for when you deliver the project. Avoid bottlenecks. Certainly avoid burning out yourself, your team members, your systems, and understand that there is a ripple effect. So if there's questions that goes against this, it better be a compelling reason that you're going for those other answers rather than looking at managing interdependencies and value delivery, as well as avoiding burnout. So just keep that in mind. And no decision is free. All right. There's a saying, you can have 2 of the 3 of these, being managing your scope, cost, and time, or schedule, but you can't have all 3, because if you are staying within specifications and on timeline, you get behind this, the cost is going to go up. If the cost goes down, you may have to de-scope. So all of these things interplay with one another, but every change you make affects cost, every single one. All right. And that could be a good thing. That could be a bad thing. I'm not making a value judgment one way or another. It's just something that needs to be recognized. Now, some of the things we need to consider is stewardship and prudence. So prudence is the right action, right time with forethought, all right? Where stewardship is careful management of resources. So it's pretty much a marriage of the two. And so you want to, with that and in that mindset, you need to focus on making sure that you're not over designing or over adding too many resources. You're protecting that stakeholder value because ultimately with value delivery, you're giving something tangible at either the end of the milestones or gates or at the project when you deliver. And if it isn't value added, doesn't matter if you've hit all the proper check marks. Are you really doing anything and it going to have a good outcome? Likely not. So again, anticipate those second and third order effects, the ripple effects, if you will. System thinking in practice. This isn't a to-do list. All right. We're talking about interconnecting everything, bringing it together, setting up that marriage. So, and understanding the trade-offs. So it's not a simple check mark. It is the interconnectedness and interdependency of everything connected together. All right, human-centered leadership. And so these are the soft skills. All right, how do you interact with, the people you're working with? How do you interact with stakeholders? How do you interact with your suppliers within your organization or possibly outside your organization? All right, people first projects are built on relationships. So depending on your approach and depending on what it is your organizational structure is set up, you may have project team members that you rate on or conduct performance reports on. They may be assigned their functional managers who assign their reports. And then if that's the case, you may not have any, direct authority. So it's wise to learn to lead based on influence and how you take care of people. Because one project where you have legitimate authority may not be the same way the next. And so you need to be able to operate in all kinds of project environments. And so through the project management mindset, you want to influence rather than leverage your authority. All right. Motivate, transform people's perspective, not the transactional carrot in the stick. And to do this, you need to build trust, and trust is built on communications. If you don't communicate with somebody, how are they going to trust you? Because they don't know you. All right. Much like this conversation that we're having here, you wouldn't necessarily be on the call if you weren't interested in the topic and we're communicating. Yes, this is more of a talking head type scenario.